Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first plenary session of the conference Entangled Englishes in Translocal Spaces, organized by the Center for Language Studies and the Department of English and Humanities at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. The plenary session titled SDG-based Impact Ranking of Higher Education and the Role of English, Perspective from Bangladesh, will be presented by Professor Shamsad Mortuza, the Acting Vice Chancellor and the Dean of School of Arts and Humanities, University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. An academician with over 27 years of teaching experience, Professor Shamsad Mortuza is currently professor on leave from the University of Dhaka. He has previously taught at many universities, including his alma mater, Jahangirnagar University, where he was the chair of the Department of English between 2005 and 8. To give a background about Professor Shamsad Mortuza's academic career, he pursued his second MA in American Studies, Indian Studies at the University of Arizona as a Fulbright scholar. His PhD was on the figure of the shaman in contemporary British poetry from Birkbeck College, University of London, and was published by Cambridge Scholars Publishers. He received a second Fulbright to attend UCLA as a senior visiting postdoctoral fellow. He has published numerous articles and book chapters in reputed national and international journals. He has 2 books to his credit, I Spy and Barcode. He is the editor of ULAB Journal of English Studies, Crossings, and serves on the editorial board of the literary journal Six Seasons Review. I would now request Professor Shamsad Mortuza to present his plenary session, please.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. You'll have to bear with me, so I have running temperature, and I just finished writing my paper a while back. So if I am in a disarray, you'll have to excuse me. So the title of my paper, as the brochure says, that it's SDG-based impact ranking of higher education and the role of English, perspective from Bangladesh. So even though it says Bangladesh, I would mainly focus on our experience of taking part in Times Higher Education impact ranking based on 17 SDGs. Right. So let me begin. So this paper has a rather simple origin. Last year, when we were applying for the Times Higher Education impact ranking based on the 17 SDGs, we had meetings within our university involving the stakeholders concerned. There are 4 parameters for the Times Higher Education impact ranking. So let me fire up my slides. There are 4 parameters for the Times Higher Education impact ranking: teaching and learning, research, community engagement, and stewardship. So I'm using an old version of Times Higher Education dashboard, so it does not include teaching and ranking though. But this is copied and pasted from the Times Higher Education dashboard. Our meetings are usually held in English, as we have a few overseas faculty members in our team. But for the 4th parameter, stewardship, we needed to encourage our admin staff. And it was soon apparent that most of our colleagues from the administration were failing to understand the technical and jargon-oriented discourse on sustainability. We decided to hold different sessions for them in Bangla. And once they understood the very purpose of sustainability, the level of engagement changed drastically. And we were able to submit our application in time. The language of the policy documents thus became a determinant factor for inclusivity and exclusivity. The issue of language became even more prominent when we learned that only research publications in English available through one particular database, Elsevier/Scopus, is credited. Even a book chapter published from a prominent book house is not considered, as it is not enlisted with Elsevier. Research in other languages is not credited unless the abstracts are written in English or the keywords match the metadata of Elsevier. So you have to have access to this cultural code to be successful in a ranking bid. we become trapped by what Robert Phillipson calls linguistic imperialism or cultural imperialism. So we can use it synonymously. If one of the major objectives of SDG is to lessen inequality by promoting inclusivity and empowerment of vulnerable groups, then THE impact ranking, I shall argue, fails miserably. Instead of lessening the gap between the resource-heavy and resource-less universities from the global north and south, the ranking process privileges the Western education system, its corporatization, and its official language, English. This essay intends to add voice to the ongoing debate on rankings to ask how knowledge is produced and shared. What does it mean to be a world-class university, and for whom? The competitive framework in which institutions are pitted against one another creates a hierarchy of knowing through English. And as a university administrator, I can tell you how we have all become helpless consumers in this knowledge supermarket. Not being ranked is equated with not being visible. Not being visible means not enough enrollment. Those of you who have watched the Netflix series The Chair will know the impact of low enrollment, which is causing the English departments to become extinct. Now, whether we approve the knowledge inequality or not, we end up being a party to the cultural power, which is linked to Pierre Bourdieu's idea of cultural arbitrary. Bourdieu holds that the meaning of a sign comes not from any substantive relationship to the signified, but from its relationship to other signs in a symbolic structure. In this symbolic structure of university ranking, the privileging of English demonstrates the after effects of colonialism, institutionalized imperialism, linguistic and cultural biases, endemic inequality, and inherent racism in the curriculum. The ranking parameters construct one such symbolic structure. Education, unfortunately, has become a big business. At a local level, it caters to the brand perception and market visibility, but it also has an international edge. Ranking is intrinsically linked with student mobility. Michel Stack observes, quote, "The impact of rankings is not limited to student selection of university or the metrics used to evaluate research. Their effects extend well into the global economy. Studies consistently point to the impacts that university rankings have on trade, immigration policy, the flow of graduate students, faculty hiring, and philanthropic and financial support. Tuition fees, and in some cases, even universities' presidents' salaries. Now, Stack quotes Muller to argue that university rankings are a form of rent seeking in the public higher education institutions, and it redirects to social surplus towards private actors. Now, this last idea is very interesting, and it became evident this rent seeking idea, when we were approached by an independent consultant authorized by Times Higher Education for vetting our application and policy documents. Now, they demanded an exuberant fees for 8-hour service. As a small university, we had to say rain check and try to navigate through the ranking maze on our own. We, however, participated in the THE Summit, in which ranking agencies promoted their brand value and marketing strategies. The academic leaders attending the summit formed a self-support group to endorse one another. With the help of these universities, perhaps, there are countries that have strategized to move up the ranking ladder. The overwhelming presence of Chinese, Middle Eastern, and Indian universities in the world ranking, is perhaps a case in point. But one downside of this ranking process is the bureaucratization of the system. Academic freedom is seriously cracked down as teachers and administrators are forced to create paper trails for their activities. Unless you have the right policy in place, you are unlikely to have international partners or grants from external bodies. Their prescriptions are beefing up our HR manuals on a regular basis. And the quality assurance cell has become ever so busy in chasing us with designated forms for every little thing that we do. For accuracy, so the quality of education involves, for example, whether I, as a course teacher, have held an election to elect or select the class monitor. Now, let me explain this idea with how our university is ranked in SDG 4. So SDG 4 is quality education. Okay, so what THE does, so basically there are 17 SDGs. So they have selected SDGs 17 as mandatory, and then you can apply for 3 other SDGs. And again, against these SDGs, there are certain metrics, and these are measured through unique targets. So that's how this ranking process works. So I'll just look at SDG 4. So if you look at the metrics, let me go back to my text. Okay, so let me explain the idea with how our university is ranked in SDG 4, which is quality education. You'd think that quality education would involve the faculty and teaching resources you have at your disposal and how your students are being benefited. Now think again, the 4 metrics for quality education are research into pedagogy, and that too has to be vetted and endorsed simply by Scopus and Elsevier and no one else. The number of graduated with a primary school teaching qualification, lifelong learning measures, and the proportion of first-generation students. These metrics are then translated into targets. A university needs to fulfill these targets to get scores in these given categories. Lifelong learning is determined by the university's policy to share resources with those who are not studying at the university. Right. So if I go to the next one, so this is how, so the third metric. So this is lifelong learning measures, and this are the targets. So if you do this, so that's how THV will tell you that, yes, you have met the targets by looking into the subcategories. So to get scores in this given category. So lifelong learning is determined by the university's policy to share resources with those who are not studying at the university. Now, technically speaking, so this conference can be used as an example for sharing resources for those who are not studying at ULAB. Now, so who decides that this knowledge sharing is the hallmark of quality education under SDG 4? Now, in this case, it is the education supplement of a Western newspaper who has seen the business potential through using the desire of the universities to become visible. THE has normalized the dominance of Western knowledge over the non-Western cultures and the global South. This is a watered-down version of THE World Ranking, in which there are different parameters for teaching and research in the elite categories, which heavily rely on the investment and funding available to our university. For lesser universities, new categories are constantly invented to market knowledge. Knowledge is presented as a commodity, and rankings, metrics, and paid publications are the currency. The original targets under conventions for the rights of children for SDG available in the UN documents. Now, if you look at the UN documents, okay, so, all right, so for example, you're supposed to cater to first generation students, so that's what you're supposed to do. But this is the UN prescription, what you're supposed to do. Okay, so let me read that the original targets under conventions for the rights of children for SDG 4 available in the UN document will highlight the changes. First, development of the child's personality, talents, and mental physical abilities to their fullest potential. The development of respect for human rights and fundamental freedom, and for the principles enshrined in the Charter of the UN. The development of respect for child's parents, his or her own cultural identity, language, and values, for the national values of the country in which the child is living, the country from which he or she may originate, and for civilizations different from his or her own. The preparation of the child for responsible life in a free society in the spirit of understanding, peace, tolerance, equality of sexes, and friendship among all people, ethnic, national, and religious groups and persons of indigenous origin, and the development of respect for natural environment. So if you look at this charter, you see that when we come to the metrics, it's completely different. So somehow they have tailor-made it to serve the knowledge market. So rather than enriching knowledge for the progress of humanity, the ranking nexus makes it subservient to the dictates of the market. The desire to be visible often makes universities submit fabricated data. Now, referring to Michel Stack again, so he gives the example of Temple University in the US and its business program. Now, Temple University's business program was ranked #1 in the US for 4 successive years. But after an investigation by the Pennsylvania Attorney General and the US Department of Education, the university admitted to falsifying data for its business school, and once it has done then 6 of its other graduate programs. Now, soon after the Temple scandal hit the papers, 8 other colleges admitted that they too had sent incorrect data to the US US Education Department. Now, loosely used, so what is sustainability? So the term sustainability can refer to the idea of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this can be one way of defining sustainability, that so you prepare this generation for the posterity. Now, the proposed goal of sustainable development is failed as it adds to the economic inequality and the uneven power distribution. Now, before we proceed further, it is important to define the sustainability. So according to Victor Nolet, 2 fundamental assumptions underlie the formulation of the SDGs. The first assumption is that any effort to restore and preserve planetary ecological integrity can be deemed successful only if it also addresses the profound social and economic inequalities that create suffering around the planet today. Economic, social, and environmental concerns must be viewed as interconnected and equal in importance. And the second assumption is that the rights and needs of future generations are equal to those of people alive today. Now, how do we tackle such a vested interest in cultural domination? So you see that the Times Higher Education has deviated from the prescription of SDGs. So, and it is promoting a vested interest in cultural domination. Now, an examination of the power structures and prevalent assumptions can reveal the knowledge inequality. An assessment of the lack of English in our administrative staff can reveal some headway. Now, in my research, so this is part of a larger research, to be honest. So I plan to analyze the data submission process through the THE dashboard to understand how language contributes to this knowledge structure. Now, for this particular presentation, so I shall reflect on the reconfiguration of knowledge in a new liberalized world. I shall discuss how the UN Millennium Goals of attaining 17 SDGs have contributed to the making of a corporate structure that has little regard for research quality or the well-being of the academicians. The curriculum mapping along the SDG lines, so creates additional pressure on teachers to go beyond their discipline or lesson plan to include items in tandem with market demands. For us, in the humanities, it is even more frustrating as courses and research publications in STEM areas are assigned with higher value because of their supposed market demand and relevance. Even a journal such as Critical Inquiry ranks 500 in the Scopus ranking. Now, this is further evident in the marginalization of vernacular and indigenous knowledge. Uh, they are posited at the bottom of the intellectual totem pole. For THE ranking, Elsevier is the global gatekeeper. The system is becoming exploitative, to say the least. Say, we have a national professor at ULAB in Bangla, so whose lifelong research on our national poet means nothing when we are making the ranking bid. My colleague's monograph, published from a world-class press, was not catalogued with the knowledge predator. Yet, some spot surveys and white papers on COVID-19 or air pollution have more impact value than a doctoral thesis on indigenous culture turned into a book. Often there are token figures sponsored by the Global North as a gesture of their community outreach outlined in the ranking metrics. Still, the control of funding and project agenda depends mostly on the donors and agencies from the Global North. Even while faculty recruitments, ranking of universities from where an applicant is considered, is considered. That simply makes the ranking system sustainable. Now, how can we have a sustainable future if such discrepancies prevail? If we ignore intellectual equality, we may not attain the other goals. And in order to do that, we need to rethink the metrics in which universities are evaluated. One possible way out is to break the monopoly of this paywall publishing, the predatory journals and the, published through payments and all that. And the adoption of open source journals can liberate academic publications from the knowledge syndicate. The overemphasis on specialization is also responsible for creating academic silos. This can be reduced by promoting interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research. Two of our plenary speakers, Dr. Sham Sharma and Dr. Amar Mahbub, have been promoting such activities for a long time as they use their Western vantage points to reach out to their home countries as well as other parts of the world. As for research, the major criteria for assessment should be their social and humanitarian impact. For instance, while THE ranks a university for its policy on enrolling first-generation students, it does not credit a minority discipline. Knowledge should be viewed as a common inheritance that can be used for the benefit of humanity. Now, to return to the question of language, how do we ensure that human knowledge is viewed as shared heritage for the future? What role can the English departments play in addressing this issue? Now, Robert Phillipson's 1992 book, Cultural Imperialism, has sparked of serious debate. We wish Professor Phillipson was here, as was originally planned, to answer this question. I can only speak for my department and for my university. We have laid heavy emphasis on translation studies and cultural studies. This morning, Professor Pennycook's new materialist reading of the commercial signboards selling cheap English makes us alive to the needs to read the world as a text. Professor Pennycook's social semiotics trajectories focused on the assemblages and entanglements. We can also see the ranking process as an entanglement that requires conscious interventions. In order to do that, we will need competence in both first language and second language or foreign language, however you put it, English. In order for the monopoly of research and ranking, more and more scholarship from the global south needs to be available to the global north. Thank you.